Our opening words come from the Reverend Kristen Grassel-Schmidt. In this season of waiting, this time when days grow shorter and the nights longer, as we keep watch for hope and peace, joy and love to be born in our midst, may the wings of the Spirit open softly within us, gracing us with inspiration, so that our waiting itself becomes the place of a new creation. Come, let us worship together. For many years, I was a volunteer at the local library. And each year we would organize a huge book sale. At the start, we would just set out boxes of books, but then we got the idea that sorting books by genres and collecting stacks of the individual titles, it seemed to come in by the dozens. Seemed like a good idea, but those books like the Da Vinci Code, which we think every single person in the county bought and wanted to discard, the huge stacks of John Grisham and Tom Clancy thrillers. Our huge stacks were typically fiction, except for one book, What to Expect When You're Expecting. Now, this book is quite handy for first-time expectant mothers. It includes advice on the physical and emotional changes, tells you what's going on in the baby's development, nutritional advice, even sexuality and advice for partners and spouses. I don't know someone who was pregnant in the last 15 years who, when they announced, got a copy of this, usually by a doting mother or a best friend. And once you've been through it, they say you don't need the book anymore, so off to the library book sale it goes, onto the pile with the dozens of other copies, along with the piles of Brown and Grisham and Clancy. But it is handy to know what to expect when you're expecting. Before this book, of course, this information was passed down in the oral tradition and has been since the dawn of time. But what of those who don't have mothers or best friends or aunts to advise them, or women who are in situations that prevent them from talking to their mother? Now imagine you are a young woman named Mary in Nazareth in the first century of the Common Era. You have recently been betrothed to a man named Joseph from the same village. You were brought up to follow the laws of the Torah, and your behavior, sexual and otherwise, is tightly regulated. Yet, things don't go according to plan, and you find yourself pregnant, and you have no one to tell you what to expect. Now, of course, the religious leaders from your time, and certainly in the future, frame this as a miracle. We are told that Mary did, in fact, know, and that knowing could not have been easy under these circumstances.
Be the same. Confusion floods my soul. My heart races with fear. This can't be happening to me.
In God's sight, don't understand just how a child could come to me. Oh, favor. Why me? Why now? And yet I am the handmaid.
And so, yes, it is likely that when Mary was pregnant, she had no idea who her child would be. It is, in fact, only long after their deaths that we get the mythic narratives, the visitation of the angel Gabriel, the miraculous conception, and Mary's song, which is known to us as the Magnificat, which we heard part of in Roger Holland's song. Yet she must have known how special this pregnancy was. And so Mary did say yes and waited for her child to be born and hopefully accepted by her betrothed and her community, hoping, like every expectant mother, that they be healthy and safe and successful and loved, hoping, like every expectant mother, that their children would bring light and love to the lives of those around them. And for them, believing that her faithfulness to God was being rewarded. At the core, this is what the season of Advent is about. It is a time of waiting, waiting for the changes that come as new life grows, waiting for something new to change us, waiting simply for the new birth and a new light to shine, to bring love to all. So one of Aesop's fables tells the story of a thirsty crow who spotted a pitcher of water, but whose beak wasn't long enough to get in to reach the water. So he started dropping pebbles into the pitcher, and eventually the water begins to rise. Now, this tale is often told to illustrate perseverance. But what if instead the water is our belief that, as Theodore Parker says, the moral arc of the universe is long, but bends towards justice? And what if the pebbles, which often look like boulders to us, are actually so small the water doesn't seem to rise? Even when these pebbles of shocking injustice are not just dropping one by one, but by handfuls. We have a too long list of harm to people of color, immigrants, children, trans folk, women, the First Nations, our democracy, our lands, our planet. And now we have a too long list of people who have died because of COVID-19, a too long list of people who have been taken ill by the disease and still suffer with its effects. And despite safety precautions and vaccines, the loss and stress and trauma of the pandemic continues. And we are left wondering, how many more pebbles can our pitcher take before justice rises to the top? How do we make sense in this season of waiting, of the need to wait? Because we are waiting. We long for justice in our justice system and safety on our streets for everyone. We long for accountability and responsibility from the very people who demand our respect, sometimes violently. We long for a day when every single person would rise up and say, enough is enough, we must stop the violence. Oh, how we wait. And waiting for the long moral arc of the universe can be discouraging and demoralizing. It can bring despair, paralysis, denial. Waiting is exhausting. We cry out, oh, how long, oh Lord, how long? But wait, we must. During this Advent season, of course, we are called to wait differently. Reverend Annie Gonzalez Milliken writes that we are called to active, hopeful waiting. She reminds us to wait like Mary, a pregnant teenager in an occupied territory who still knows she is sacred. Gonzalez Milliken writes, if you too know oppression in our current society, remember how very sacred you are. Remember that you are co-creating divinity itself with your life. Let your soul magnify the divine, who would scatter the proud and bring down the mighty and fill the hungry with good things. Second, she reminds us to wait like Joseph, who stands by his pregnant fiancée when his society tells him she is wrong, unrespectable, immoral, and when he himself is confused. We should think carefully about the judgments we make and hear. We must learn to value justice and righteous anger more than respectability and peace. We must put ourselves in dialogue with others and find a way to stand with those who are bringing love into this world, even if they're not doing it exactly the way we'd like. And in our waiting, we must listen and be open to the truth of other people's experiences, the violence and condemnation, the fear and the struggle. We cannot step into another's shoes and know their experience, but we can practice radical empathy as best we know. And so in this way, we wait. We aren't still. No, we keep on moving forward. We actively wait for new creation, beloved community, a way of living into relationship that defies the systems that destroys lives. We actively wait for true liberation that draws the circle of love ever wider. We wait in this time of Advent.
The spirit of truth, come in, for in our world and in ourselves there is conflict. Too many lives form the battleground of struggle for justice and power. Grant us patience as we keep on moving forward, never turning back. Give us a common dream. Fill us with peace. Fill us with the truth of this season.
Oh, come you day spring, come and cheer our spirits by your presence here. Stand on in every broken soul, as vision that can see the whole. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come within as light to dwell.
In the film Michael, there is a moment where the titular archangel, played by John Travolta, has an opportunity to brag a little about the influence he has had on humanity. I invented standing in line, he insists. Before that, everybody just gathered around. It was all a big mess, so I said, why don't we just make a line? When he asks what the line was for, he replies, to get in. We are good at waiting. We wait for the bus, we wait for the check to arrive, for the wound to heal, for the workday to end, for the call from a loved one, for a good diagnosis. We wait often to start things. As soon as I finish my degree, after I get a new job, as soon as I meet someone, after I lose weight, once we have a new building, when the death of my partner doesn't feel so sharp, as soon as this depression lifts, when the pandemic is over. But the pandemic has worn on so long, time seems meaningless right now. I look at my calendar and it tells me it's December, but wow, that doesn't seem right. Wasn't it just May? And wasn't that like a year ago? And what happened to summer? What even is time? And the only way I really know it's December is that there are signs of the holiday season, the colored lights on the house down the street, the daily emails from stores imploring us to buy, the advent calendars and candles that remind us of this time of waiting, this time of pausing. And while December is often frenetic, full of shopping and baking and parties and pageants, there was always a sense that our pace was about to change. We look at the bare trees and touch the solid ground and notice a dearth of songbirds. And yet we know too that underneath the ground, living things are changing and growing through this pause. The writer of Ecclesiastes in the Hebrew Bible reminds us that for everything there is a season and a time for every purpose under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted. It's true for the earth, and it is true for us. In a normal year, we would say, of course, we know this, but 22 months into the pandemic, we still aren't sure how to plan because we hold our breath in fear of the next variant that's already sweeping through most of the nation. And we wait. We sit in this long, so long, strange, growing, colder pause, unsure, anxious, wondering if life will ever return to normal, wondering what normal will ever even look like. This feeling, a combination of listlessness, yearning, distraction, loneliness, boredom, tinged with grief and melancholy. We all feel it at different measure and different times. And thanks to an early 5th century monk named John Cassian, we know its name, Acedia. The feeling isn't new, and it isn't ours alone. We are, in fact, all feeling this. In the 5th century, it was the effect of a monastic life separated from the flow of humanity with no end in sight. In the 21st, it is the effect of pauses and lockdowns and quarantines separated from the hustle and bustle of life as we knew it. Early on, it was useful, the slowdown. We cooked more, we baked bread, we dug into projects, we learned Zoom. In our congregations, we moved worship and meeting and other groups online, and we held fundraisers and we put some projects on hold. As vaccines became available, we ventured out tentatively, with things opening and closing again, opening, closing, still trying to be safe. And our lives, these 22 months later, still on hold for so many things. Now what? How will we ever get back to what we were doing? Will we ever? What we know is that even in the midst of the pandemic, things have happened. We had an acrimonious election cycle, an insurrection, massive wildflowers, horrific tornadoes, tragic deaths, protests that were turned violent, personal losses and struggles, and all of the things that in a normal, non-pandemic year would feel hard already, but now feel even more so. In this crisis, in every crisis, things still happen and we change. We will be different. Even as we paused, things changed. You will have changed. We already have. Process theology, which we find both named and unnamed throughout Unitarian Universalist thought, tells us that events, not matter, are the discrete base of reality. Everything from the tiniest quark to the biggest bodies of mass, and thus every thought and action too, is in motion. Even when we think we are at rest, every action, every idea, every choice is the universe growing and changing. And that's actually comforting in a culture that expects us to have goals and objectives and ambitions and layers on the guilt of unachieved expectations. It's nice to know that something is always moving and growing, even when we are still. And while it seems like we have been in the longest Advent season ever, it does matter that we mark Advent now. Advent becomes more important because in the midst of this frenetic season of more, contrasted with the still in many ways time pause of the pandemic, Advent asks us to stop, be still, and give thanks. And it asks us to be present and wait for the light to return. It asks us to be present with and for each other. Advent asks us to be a light for one another, to be subject to one another. I know that's sometimes difficult when there is so much suffering and so much separation, and so many of us have our own pains, sorrows, and troubles. Yet we can still be a light for one another in this time of waiting. We can share our own stories of loss and fear and struggle, our own stories of pain and sorrow and trouble, and bring comfort and light to those who need it. We may not know how our own darkness can bring light to others, but in this time of waiting for the light to come, we can hear the cries of others who are lost in the darkness, and together we can find the way out. And so, as we have seen, waiting takes on many forms: excitement and anticipation, anxiety and nervousness, action and presence, anger and paralyzing frustration, confidence and dread. Sometimes all of those things, all at once. Yet, even in this most difficult December, in this timeline marked by washing hands, wearing masks, keeping distant, making sure we're boosted, learning and working and worshiping and even socializing, largely still online. Advent reminds us over and over to stop and be still and give thanks. Advent calls us to seek out and offer hope as best we can, even when hope is hard to find. Advent asks us to be present in the moment, even as we are throwing up our hands in frustration, even as we are making endless lists, even as we are dreading awkward family interactions made fraught with anxieties over safety, even as we are feeling overwhelmed by the pressures of the season, even as we are dwelling in regrets and inadequacies, even with all those things, simply being present to the moment, to what is needed in the moment. It's hard waiting because it is open-ended. It's out of our control. Yet when we are present to our waiting and active in our waiting, we can feel that sense of hope that waiting promises, that our pains, sorrows, and troubles will ease, that the moral arc of the universe will bend toward justice, the baby will be born, that the oil in the lamp will last one more night, that the light of the sun will come again. In the waiting, there is hope.